Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Guiding Light, where we help women follow the peace. I'm Jenna Carson, and alongside me is my co host, Sierra Larson.
Hello, everyone.
We're so excited to have you join us for another episode. And today we are going to discuss adverse experiences and the mind body connection.
Yes, I am so excited to talk about this today. As you guys have heard in our last couple episodes, I am a licensed clinical social worker and I love mental health. And one of the things that I love talking about is how our adverse experiences play a role in our brain health, our brain functioning, and how that translates into the body and the way that the body expresses that. And so I have kind of a story that we're going to use to kind of follow along and just to be able to visualize what is happening in our brains and in our body and see how we were designed to handle stress and adverse experiences. So I'm excited to talk about that today. Okay, so imagine that it is 10,000 BC and you are standing in a dense prehistoric forest. The air is thick with the scent of earth and foliage. You hear rustling in the bushes, and a low growl follows. Your heart pounds in your chest as a massive tiger emerges from the underbrush. Its eyes are locked on you, muscles rippling beneath its striped coat. You have nothing but a spear in your hand, and your survival depends on the next few moments. Pretty scary, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, our brains were designed to handle this exact moment. So, not to get too technical, but I do want to do a little bit of brain science. The front part of our brains are designed for more complex thinking. So puzzles, logic, um, social interactions, just things that take much more like cognitive processing, all happens in the front part of our brains. The back part of our brains, as far back as you can go, the more functions as more of an automatic system. So things like blinking, heartbeat, body temperature, core temperature regulation, those things happen in the back of our brain. It would be really annoying if you had to be like blink, blink, blink every time, right? Usually those things happen on their own, and they happen back here automatically. Now, in between the front and back of our brain, we have the amygdala, which is responsible for keeping us alive. It is the part of our brain that when the tiger comes, activates and tells our body, hey, we need to get to safety, or we need to fight, or we need to be really still. And so if you're in this situation in 10,000 BC and a tiger comes, you're probably going to have your amygdala activated. At least you should. Like that is how we are biologically wired, is to have our amygdalas activating at this moment. And so what will happen is your amygdala will send a signal to your body that says, hey, we're in danger, get ready. And it will send those stress hormones to the body, and the body will react in a few different ways. And so some things that may happen is you may feel your heartbeat accelerate, and you might hear that thudding in your ears. Blood will rush to your muscles, making you feel tense and ready to move. You can feel your breathing start to get quicker and like almost kind of hyperventilating, so that you're pulling more oxygen into your lungs, and you're able to fuel your muscles to act. Other things that can happen are your pupils will dilate. so that you can sharpen your vision, kind of like tunnel vision, and be able to see the direct threat in front of you. You might start sweating because as all of these things are happening, your body temperature is rising. So to regulate your body temperature, you might sweat. Your stomach muscles will tighten. Your body will completely stop the process of digestion because it's not the time to digest your food when you're about to fight or flee a tiger. So that will happen. And then you could also, you also will save energy. And so what will happen is a lot of times this part of the brain is going to go completely off because you don't really need, a lot of logical, like complicated processing while you're trying to fight a tiger. You're just like, oh, there's a threat. We need to handle the threat in front of us. So we don't usually have a lot. We are capable of accessing this part of our brain, but it's typically shuts off while this part is going off, and that's important.
And so for people who aren't watching but are listening, Sarah's pointing to the front part of the brain turning off, well, slowing down, right? Shutting down, and the back part activating.
Yes, thank you. I'm talking with my hands a lot, so thank you for narrating that. And so a lot of that energy will be directed to the brain and to the limbs and to the muscle tension, so that you're kind of just at like peak fighting mode, and physically and mentally and emotionally, you are at peak fight or flight. And this is exactly how it's supposed to happen. Now, the issue is it's not 10,000 BC, right? Like, I don't know. I've never been in this situation. Have you?
No.
No. Okay, right? Like, we're
Thankfully.
not. I know, right? I mean, maybe somebody out there has, but typically we're not running from tigers, at least not the physical tigers that you might think of. But what's happened over time, over millennia, is our amygdala has just gotten better and better at keeping us alive. And it's also gotten more and more sensitive. And so it is constantly trying to be aware of threats and either emotionally or physical threats that we might have in our environment. So I have this e-course about all of this. I'm kind of rushing through it a little bit, but I do have an e-course where I talk about all of it. But in my course, and when I talk to clients about this, I usually will kind of like stand up and just say, like, am I 100% safe right now? Jenna, what would you think? Like sitting right here, am I 100% safe?
How technical do you want me to get? I mean,
so technical. Am I 100% safe?
No, because at any given moment something could happen, like a natural catastrophe. So
just a natural catastrophe. Sometimes when I'm doing this, you can see like the fan above me. Some people will say like, oh, the fan will fall on you, or you can see my window. They'll say like I've gotten like a sniper could come through the window. Sorry if that's, but so it's what's
or
interesting.
You could have a medical emergency too. You just never know, right?
Yeah. So it's actually really interesting how quickly our brains can think of these threats, right? But the reality is, until one of those things actually starts happening, I could sit here all day long and be perfectly safe, 100% safe. But our brains are wired to assess threats at all times. And we were not designed to constantly be in this stress state. It's very hard on the body. The muscle tension, the slow digestion, the heart racing, all of those things are designed for a very short period of time. And what's happening kind of in just modern day society is we're exposed to so many threats, and our amygdala is activated way more than it should be. And so, Jenna, you're my only like test subject right now, but do me a favor, drop your shoulders and relax your jaw, and then try and relax your pelvic floor muscles, like your stomach muscles, your hips. Were they tight and did you actually have to relax them?
Yeah, so I didn't even realize I was holding tension in my pelvic floor
Yes,
until you said something.
exactly. And most of
Hmm.
us are. And that is
Hmm.
actually really indicative of being in a threat response.
Hmm.
And when you tune into your body and you realize, like, oh, I'm holding tension in my body, your threat response is activated, and you'll start to realize how often throughout your day your threat response is being activated.
Yeah, yeah. And then if you have grown up in a home where you had extra threats, I don't know if I should go into this, Sierra. We can cut this, but I'm thinking how, especially people who grow up in a fight or flight situation with parents or other caretakers, you are extra, extra activated because you've had to survive real, very, very real, very present threats.
Yeah, definitely. That's actually we can actually definitely go into it. So I am going kind of quickly, but that's one of the things I focus on in my e-course is trauma and either big T trauma like abuse, neglect, natural disasters, loss of a loved one, like some of the things you see in the DSM-5, or even little T trauma, which can be any adverse experience that has negatively affected the way you see yourself, others, or the world around you. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, and the more traumatic events that you've experienced, either in childhood or uh, as an adult or throughout your lifespan, the more traumatic events you've been exposed to, the more sensitive your amygdala is, and the more likely you are to be in an active threat response more often and to have that stress in your body and see a lot of like somatic symptoms from the traumatic experiences that you may have had.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think some people, including myself, might compare our trauma with others and say, well, it wasn't that bad. So, for example, in my life, I can share that I grew up with loving parents. My father also has a lot of mental illness, and so I wasn't at risk of physical abuse with him at all, but I did not feel safe growing up a lot around him. I did not feel psychologically safe, and I love him dearly, but that sense of safety wasn't there. It was very unpredictable and uncertain. And so I grew up in a lot of pain, a lot of physical pain. I had physical pain from the time I was a child, and that's that's interesting because most healthy children probably shouldn't be feeling a lot of pain, but I had all this tension, and I still, as an adult in my 30s, I still feel like I'm trying to learn how to relax my body because I did go into fight or flight because I didn't feel psychologically that I always understood what was going on and that it was predictable and that my behaviors would be answered in a predictable way. And so I kept saying over the years, like, why do I have so much pain and tension in my body? Like, I really didn't have that bad of a childhood. But the fact is, the brain doesn't differentiate all the time. Like, the body is objective. Like, it just knows that there's a threat and it goes into response. Is that correct, Sierra?
Absolutely, yes.
Whether it's a tiger, a massive, massive threat, or somebody cutting you off on the highway, that brain knows what to do to go into protection mode. And so for all of you listeners who think, oh, well, it wasn't that bad, or I can't complain because look what so and so had to go through. Like the fact is that even those little traumas we ought to be paying attention to because our body might be reading them as massive traumas.
Yes. And the way I like to explain kind of more the little T traumas, right? Because trauma is kind of a buzzword, so people might not feel like they can use it all the time. But when I talk about little T trauma, I use an example of, for example, like pretend you are in middle school and your teacher asks a question at the whiteboard and says, "Hey, does anybody have any thoughts?" And you raise your hand and you say something and everyone laughs. And then your teacher kind
Ah,
of like brushes over it, right?
mhm.
Like, no one's gonna say that that's trauma, maybe not, but most people wouldn't when you ask. They probably wouldn't even remember it. But when it's considered like kind of that little t trauma, as if it negatively impacts the way you see yourself, the way you see others, and the way you see the world around you. So if there is a thought that's attached to that experience that says, oh, people don't take me seriously, I don't really have much to contribute, um, people think that I'm silly, those kinds of things, if that thought is attached to that experience, that becomes a traumatic event. Um, and so that might show up later in life. You're at work and your boss might say, "Hey, does anybody have anything to contribute?" And you might have a really great idea, but because of that thought, you might be in this stress response and might be too afraid to raise your hand and just say, "Oh, I have an idea," because of that one experience. And that's just one thing. So, yeah, if somebody has grown up with multiple experiences like this, those definitely could add up to a lot of thoughts that are triggering this amygdala response and putting you in this fight or flight mode continually. So definitely, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And the great thing is when we recognize these patterns, it can help us feel more empowered because we can see what's going on in the body. We can know, okay, my past is informing how I'm holding my body today, and I can work through with a sense of empowerment, can work through some of these things and live in a calmer state.
Definitely. And so I do want to talk a little bit more about just ways that this might show up throughout your
Yeah.
day and in your life, and then some things that you can do. But first, I think we need to take a break for our sponsor.
If you are a mental health therapist looking to streamline your practice and reach more clients, and you're just starting out or have an established practice, finding the right tools to manage your work can be challenging. That's where Headway comes in. Headway is a platform designed specifically for therapists, making it easier than ever to connect with clients, manage appointments, and handle billing, all in one place.
With Headway, you can focus more on what matters most, providing quality care to your clients. It's simple to use and it's tailored to meet the unique needs of mental health professionals. Plus, Headway helps you get paid faster and ensures you're never bogged down with administrative tasks.
And the best part, Headway connects you with new clients, expanding your reach without the need for constant marketing efforts. So whether you're a therapist, psychologist, or counselor, Headway has you covered.
If you're ready to simplify your practice and grow your client base, click the link in the show notes today to get a $100 sign on bonus.
Um, we're back. So I think the biggest way that these principles apply in just kind of our everyday life is a lot of times we're having a lot of these physical, emotional, and social symptoms that are coming from prolonged periods of time in this stress response. So, for example, we mentioned that the stomach stops digesting. And I've actually seen a lot in my work with trauma. So one of the things that I work with my clients is when I work with my clients is a lot of them have like different digestion issues as far as like ulcers, constipation, acid reflux, a lot of those things because the digestive system will slow down and not fully digest their food throughout the day because they're in such a high stress response as they're going throughout their day. Other things that this affects is sleep. Um, em- a lot of times, like emotional. regulation as far as like angry outburst and aggression. One of the things about fighting a tiger is you need to be aggressive. There's something that you need to fight, and so it'll have a lot of those aggressive hormones that'll get pumped through you in order to fight this threat. And so a lot of those things are symptoms that we see throughout our day that we might not realize are a result of trauma or of being in this stress response.
Yeah. Yep. So how do we respond to these things?
We're going to talk about that in the next couple of episodes, but one of the things I have found to be really effective is remember when we talked about this part of our brain turning off,
The
is
front part.
the front part, right? Sorry. Yes, the prefrontal cortex, where I'm pointing to my forehead right now if you're just listening. This is the part of the brain that turns off. And if we do not need to be in this stress response, there are a couple of ways to turn it back on. One, we can calm our bodies and then get into our thinking brain and think through the situation and really assess the situation to see if it is a realistic threat and if our response is helpful or realistic. And that's a lot of what I train people to do in therapy. Other ways is to kind of go the top down and activate that part of your brain through grounding and just different mental exercises that you can do in order to take that top down approach and do different mental exercises, guided imagery, activating this part of our brain to our prefrontal cortex to shut off the amygdala and say, hey, no, we're good, we're safe, I assessed the threat, we're okay, nothing's going to hurt us. And we turn that amygdala off using the front part of our brain. Or we can use our bodies to turn the amygdala off and then engage the front part of our brains, which I know you're going to talk about in our next episode about somatic symptoms and different ways that that presents in our body. So,
Well, I'm excited.
yeah, me too. So one action item I would love for our listeners to do is kind of what I talked about, is to pay attention to tension in the jaw, tension in the shoulders, and tension in the pelvic floor throughout your day. And what that will do is it'll really help you focus on how often you're being activated throughout your day and also the things that are activating you. When do you notice it the most? When is it the most difficult to keep your body in a relaxed state? And pay attention to that so that we can kind of work through that. But I think that the benefit of that will be to first understand how often it's happening and when it's happening so that we can do more things and use more self-regulation skills and different skills that we'll learn throughout our time here on this podcast to be able to stay in a relaxed body.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Sierra, for teaching us today about stress responses in the body. We look forward to digging right into the next episode. It is available now for you, our listeners. Please do not forget to subscribe to our podcast, follow us on social media, and stay connected with our community. Together, we can uplift and empower each other. I'm Jenna Carson.
I'm Sierra Larson. Don't forget to follow the piece.